Welcome to the MI Hunting Podcast. On this episode, I'm joined by Albert Tomechko, owner and founder of Vitalize Seed Company, as we talk about his new product and talk about soil health. All right, welcome to MI Hunting Podcast. Thank you for listening. So this episode was really fun. I got to talk with Albert, one of the owners and founder of Vitalize Seed Company. Now, I was pretty excited about this product because, I talked about in the past how I have been working on creating my own seed blend. And one of the things that was hardest for me, not really to pick which type of plants to use, but more on how to properly know when to, or how much of each type of seed to put in the mix and not overseed or not underseed or, that type of thing. It drove me nuts trying to figure that out. So just so happened one day I was catching up on some podcasts I like to listen to. I was listening to the Habitat podcast, and Jared had Albert on, and they talked about this new seed company that they had put together and that they were releasing or had just released. Listen to it talk about a little bit about how they basically do a 2 planting system where you do a spring planting and then your fall planting. And then they basically put together mixes that were quite a bit similar to what I was trying to create as well. So basically they had built the seed blend that I was trying to strive for. So I was very eager to look into it, research it quite a bit, and like I said, a lot of those plants were similar in what I was hoping to do. I was able to talk to Albert a little bit on the phone, talk about the blend and how I was excited about it. It'd be perfect to get Albert onto the show and talk about it, especially after talking to him on the phone. This guy is a wealth of knowledge when it comes to different plant species and building soil health and ultimately building a food plot blend that you can hunt over essentially as well. So, but before we get into the conversation with Albert, I do want to highlight a couple different things. First, we do have an upcoming event up here in northern Michigan. The Northwest Michigan branch of the National Deer Association is holding a women's 3D archery event. They're doing it again at the Kingsley Sportsman Club. They're doing that Saturday, August 13th at 10 a.m. We did it last year, and I helped with the event a little bit, helped support it a little bit, and it was an absolute blast. My wife shot during that event. My sister actually won I think she won a tree stand as part of their giveaway, and I'm hoping that they both attend this year, and I hope that for the opportunity to be able to assist with that event as well. So if you know a lady that does shoot archery, or you're a lady yourself that would like to come and shoot during that event, they actually did do an update of their course. They actually added some more targets, expanded a little bit, so they've made some improvements even from last year. So if you're in the area, hope to see you there. All right, next we're going to take a quick stop over at the Conservation News Desk. Got a pretty interesting news article or some conservation news here, so let's jump into it. All right, so this article comes from fieldandstream.com, but if you look up anything about this news article, you're going to find lots of different hits. Lots of people have reported on it. So essentially, Representative Andrew Clyde from Georgia has introduced a bill that is dubbed the Return Our Constitutional Rights Act to eliminate, or Constitutional Rights Act, and this is to eliminate the 11% federal tax on firearms and ammunition. Essentially, it's the Pittman-Robertson Act. So that act is a federal tax that basically goes to conservation. So basically, this bill was introduced in response to a Democrat-sponsored bill that seeks to impose a 1,000% tax on any AR-style rifle. The Second Amendment and gun rights have been a big hot topic. So ultimately what Clyde is saying is that any constitutional right that's being taxed isn't really a constitutional right anymore, because basically that tax is, making it to where certain people can't potentially purchase them, by adding additional costs onto the product or onto that firearm or ammunition. It makes it harder for people to be able to afford it, ergo making it harder for people to have access to their constitutional right. Now, totally get where they're coming from in that aspect. The Pittman-Robertson Act, this was a voluntary tax that, conservation, outdoorsmen, hunters wanted to add on to it because they knew they needed to do something to help generate funds to help support conservation. So right now, there are 51 co-sponsors to this bill. Now, if you look at it, they are all Republican sponsors to this bill, which is not too surprising. We will have to wait and see with this bill because it has been just introduced, hasn't gone to committee or any additional talk about it. I suspect that this bill isn't going to make it very far. It's going to be hard to get support, especially those who are into firearms and hunting, to back the repeal of basically the Pittman-Robertson Act, basically denying those funds that, we take so much pride in whenever we buy our firearms or ammunition, knowing that part of that's going to conservation as well. So it's unlikely that this bill is going to make it very far, but we'll just have to wait and see as to what comes of it. All right, so that's it for the intro. Let's get into the conversation with Albert. All right, man. So yeah, go ahead, introduce yourself, and then we'll take off and get into talking about the mixes and the plants and whatnot.
Yeah, absolutely, Ty. Well, thanks for having me. Albert Tomechko, or Al James, as some people know me on Facebook. I'm pretty active on Habitat Chat, which is I'm an admin there, which is the group that's associated with Habitat Podcast. I've been friends with Jared and Brian over at Habitat Podcast for many years and have got to be on their show and a few other podcasts, over the years. Manage our family's property in Eastern Ohio and have for, I think we're going on 12 years now. We've managed that particular property. And we started with about 5 acres of food plots. And I think we're up to, I think we're doing 11 acres twice a year. So planting about 22 to 25 acres of food plots on that one property. And then I have several other properties that I help to manage and hunt as well, which is a lot of fun. Everything from small 10-acre pieces up to some 70 or 80-acre pieces. Just really passionate about wildlife. Manage our family property from everything from food plots to soil conservation. Obviously is my passion, but also TSI and EQIP programs for removing invasives and things like that. And we've been pretty fortunate to shoot some pretty good deer over the years, after managing it. So that's been a real success story for us. And I started Vitalize Seed with Jared. I think it was April or March. We started the company, and you'd said, well, how did you start a seed company? Well, to be honest with you, I never really wanted to start a seed business. I enjoy writing. Anybody who might follow me is probably like, yeah, you're long-winded sometimes. And I can be for sure. But I do enjoy writing quite a bit. And I was writing blogs on the Ohio Outdoors, and then Habitat Talk, which is another forum. After the QDMA forums went down, a bunch of guys went over there, and there's a bunch of really, really knowledgeable guys on every forum. Michigan Sportsman's another great one that I've been on more recently. I got invited to join it, so I did get on there, and have really enjoyed meeting a lot of the guys on that particular forum as well. So in the beginning, about, probably 6 years ago, I started hearing about like no-till more frequently, and I was a younger guy, and I was looking at $2,000 a planting season in fertilizer costs, and there was just such varying responses from people about what's needed. Like some guys said you have to fertilize, and other guys, well, you don't have to, And I kind of started doing some experiments and stuff, and long story short, I started saying, you know what, I'm going to have these clover plots, and then I'd overseed with like radish and rye. And that was it. I would just, and people would say, oh, you'll never get, you need perfect seed to soil contact and all this stuff. And sure enough, the following spring, I'd go back and my clover would look even better, and I'd have rye everywhere throughout it and totally act as a weed suppressant. The allelopathic traits of it. And I had fairly good radish. It wasn't like if you tilled it up and had a perfect seed bed, but I knew that wasn't going to happen. Right. And I was like, well, gosh, I didn't put any fertilizer down. There's something to this, and just kind of dove in more and more and kept writing these blogs and telling people, hey guys, I cut down my planting time from, 3 days to, a day and a half of planting and doing all, no-till and, terminating with an herbicide in a lot of cases. And because of that, then I was more interested in like, okay, how can I get, more diverse blends? And I started reading more books on this. And Ray Archuleta, Ag PhD, Mitch Hora. I mean, there's so many guys out there in the ag space. And that's really where I put my focus, was kind of into academia and the ag space, because I felt like they're coming from somewhat of an unbiased position. They're not really trying to sell anything. Occasionally there's somebody tied to like a liquid fertilizer or something, but like I wouldn't be buying in a volume that they care about me anyway. So just really was learning from a lot of these different guys, and every book I could read that had the term regenerative agriculture, no-till, cover crops, I read. Every podcast I could listen to, et cetera. And I started sharing this information. And what I found was, to my surprise, is I'm like, man, there's a lot of people who are interested in this. What I also found is that there was a lot of people who either didn't like the mixes that were currently out there, or, in the beginning, I'd be like, well, just try to make your own mix. And what I found is people are like, well, I'm very frustrated with this because I go to a co-op and they tell me, well, I'm not going to sell you 4 pounds of hairy veg. Like, right. They're like, you need to buy a bushel. And growing up in Ohio, that was a little bit surprising to me. I mean, I've went to some really bad co-ops. I'm not trying to say every co-op in Ohio is great. Like I went to some and I asked them for winter rye and they look at you like you have, 3 heads. They're like, what? They don't even know. And, it's some young kid they hired there that he's just like, hey, I'm trying to, make money and go home at the end of the day. So, but I had some really, really good ones too. And, I was like, in our spring mix, we have sun hemp. And that was another one. People are like, I can't get sun hemp in my area, so a lot of people were like, hey, well, when you make your mixes, can we just buy it off of you? And I'm like, well, that gets kind of hairy, unless I start actually making a company. Right. So I had been on Jared's podcast and he did like a soil health series, I think he called it. And we got to interview Mitch Hora, who's the founder of Continuum Ag, huge ag farmer in Iowa. And that was really awesome. And then Jared got a lot of messages from people. Hey, I really love this. This whole soil health movement is really interesting to me. For this year with fertilizer costs and glyphosate costs going up, there was just a huge interest. So I don't know, the stars kind of aligned. We made some calls, things ended up working out. And, we launched Vitalize Seed Company. And the whole idea behind it is not to be, what I felt was missing in a lot of these seed companies is there was a lot of confusion. Because people go, wait, there's like 300 mixes here. Which one am I supposed to plant when? And what I wanted to do is, and I told Jared, I was like, let's make a seed company that focuses on 2 mixes. That's it. We're not trying to be the shade tolerant trail logging road mix. We're not trying to be all, and I'm sure we could think of 100 other types of mixes that are out there, which are great. Like I would buy those for that situation. I just don't want to be the one. I want to focus on soil health and I want to streamline soil conservation. So we made a spring mix and a fall mix. Spring feeds fall, fall feeds spring, and so on. And it's really, I'll leave you with this and then at least for part of the introduction, because again, I can go on for a while. I'm passionate about it. It's my business, right? So I can go on for a long time about it. But I almost have come to the point where I don't like the term build soil. And I use it all the time, which I kind of kick myself, because at the end of the day, Ty, we're not trying to build soil. That's a byproduct of good soil management and nutrient cycling. So like what our mixes focus on is not necessarily like building soil. Do I think that those things will happen over time? Sure. But I don't consider it a soil building mix. I consider it a nutrient cycling program, because our spring mix is building up the nutrients and feeding the microbes and doing all the things that we want a spring mix to do in order to reduce fertilization needs so our fall mix can take advantage of the work that our spring mix did through biology, right? And now our spring mix is going to be breaking down while our fall mix is assimilating those nutrients and doing all of the things that we needed to do all fall and winter long to then feed our spring mix the next year, right? So you're really cycling the nutrients versus just this idea of, hey, I want to put a soil building mix together. I think that's a little bit misleading in a lot of ways. Not that it's wrong. Again, I use the term all the time, but as I've kind of pondered on that, I just felt like sometimes it can be a little bit misleading because, you plant a soil building mix and then go deep till it under, or you go put 300 pounds of 4600 on there. Well, you're not necessarily making your system more efficient. So are you building soil, right? So that's where it can get a little bit of a slippery slope. But what I wanted to do with Vitalize Seed, kind of bringing it full circle, is streamline that process for people, make highly attractive, highly top quality seed blends, one that feeds the next. And, we offer free shipping. We have 13 or 14 distributors now already throughout the United States. And we're hoping to add some more. And we're hoping to continue I write a soil health blog every Friday to just educate people. I mean, it might mention Vitalize Seed here and there in the article, but there's a lot of information in those, that we put out. So people, whether you're using our seed mix or not, you kind of understand, okay, what is the nitrogen cycle? What does that mean? And, we're passionate about it, and we really love our customers, and it's been amazing so far. So.
Well, it's good, man. Yeah, I mean, when I first heard about it, it was probably about 2 months ago. I was catching up on Jared's podcast and heard that you were on there. I'm like, oh, okay, I checked this out. And then immediately when I brought it up, I started looking at they do 2-system planting. Like, that's already what I'm trying to do. We've talked about it offline, but I do a spring or early summer planting, and that's my cover crop to get me ready for the fall. So the fact that you developed a program that's already doing what I was trying to do already, that was like, oh, well, perfect. That's perfect. Stars align in that regard. And then I started looking at your mixes, and it's like, these are mixes that I was trying to develop on my own as well. So the fact that, that you came up with something that was something that I was kind of envisioning trying to do myself anyways, it was like, I have to try this. I have to try the seed. And then especially too, after talking to you and just knowing how much thought you've put into it, and looking at the mixes and everything like that, like I'm excited to see what it looks like this fall, especially. I was actually just out today putting out lime, so probably when we're done with this interview, I might go out and put the other half down. So I did about 500 or 750 pounds today. So
nice.
But yeah, I mean, and like you said, it becomes a process, and I would say it is a little scary getting into the notion of doing no-till, especially when you start hearing people talk about that, oh, you don't need to fertilize, or it's always been for years that, you need to make sure that you fertilize, and, if you don't fertilize, you're not going to get anything to grow. So it's kind of scary to try to rip that Band-Aid off and get away from I'm trying to think of the word now, older farming practices, essentially.
Yeah, where you kind of conventional practices.
Yes, thank you. That's the word. Yeah,
absolutely.
Because my journey kind of started about 3 years ago. It was kind of that same idea where I wanted to do something a little bit better. It was taking me, I would spend days upon days trying to get a field ready, and it was just too much time and effort. So then I'm looking into the no-till, like, well, that looks easier. Like, they're doing it in less time, less resources. So I started playing around with it, and certainly I didn't notice improvement right away. Where for time wise, it's so much easier. You go out, plant, and terminate all same day, and then you're done with it. Now certainly I ran into an issue where I didn't have the mixes quite right, and my soil wasn't working efficiently, so I had a buildup of organic matter building up on top, or duff, where I was having some issues with seed to soil contact. So I did end up last year I hated doing it, but I did a very shallow light till just to break some of that up so I could get good seed to soil contact again. And I mean, it kind of broke my heart doing that, but felt like it was necessary at the time. But yeah, and then now this year, especially with the prices of that fertilizer, and I mean, even glyphosate, skyrocketed this year. So, and fortunately with the the findings from the soil sample, could get away with not doing any fertilizer. So that's what I'm doing for the year. I'm just going to improve my pH and see how it goes for the rest of the year, really. So it's that kind of a testament that, especially in times like this, it really benefits to, go away from that conventional farming practice and try that no-till, because at least in my experience, I've felt that it's saved me time and money so far.
Oh, yeah. Oh, absolutely. And that's the thing, too. Like, I mean, we're growing cover crops 2 times a year. I mean, most farmers even the ones who are doing extremely diverse cover crops, I mean, they're not fertilizing their cover crop mixes. And you drive by, in Ohio here, it's more and more and more and more common. You drive and it's just like, I don't know what percentage, but there are pockets where it's hard to find a field that doesn't have cover crops on it, in the wintertime. And they look green as could be. Now, they might have some residual fertilizer, from the previous farming practice, which with precision ag and stuff, they're not just throwing it on anymore, right? It's getting more and more specific. But I try to tell guys a lot of times too is I don't want to sound like a negative Nancy, so hopefully I don't come across that way, but I've almost started to, again, resent the term like regenerative agriculture. And there's some really good people in that movement. And I think that's where it gets like the lines get blurred. Mitch Hoare did a really good job on the time Jared and I got to interview him, because he was basically like, any steps that you're taking towards implementing the 6 soil health principles is a step towards regenerative agriculture. So like, he's like, we try to, and they are big time farmers. I forget how many acres, but he's like, we've reduced our Roundup use or glyphosate use by 30%, but they've reduced their nitrogen by 50%, just for talk. I don't remember specifically, but he's like, that's a step towards regenerating the system. We're using 100% cover crops on all of our fields. So take a step back and look at the whitetail world. I like to tell people we have to pull soil samples. Like our mixes, I haven't used fertilizer in 6 years. I have used lime, and I will continue to use lime. But I just think it's so critical to understand, okay, what are soil samples telling us? What is our pH? What are the base saturations? Like, let's start there, right? Then, like, what is the nitrate at 6 inches depth? Like, I use Ward Labs, and, I get that reading. If my nitrate's 0, it's like, okay, wow, there's no, why is that? What was planted here previously? What's the organic matter level? Are we going to have OM mineralization occurring to give me any nitrogen or P and K, throughout these things? So, all of your macros, understanding what's been planted before, what's going to be planting after, understanding your base saturation. So what's the calcium, magnesium, and potassium on your soil colloid? Well, in sandy soils, like I look at a lot of soil samples from Michigan. I mean, a lot. And guys will say like, okay, I got a sub 5 or sub 8 CEC soil. It's like, okay, that's fairly light. And I'll look at their magnesium, and their magnesium's at 5 or 6% base saturation, maybe 10% base saturation. And I immediately go, okay, and their pH, let's say, is 5.8. Calcium's probably like 40, 50%. I'm like, immediately, we need to use dolomite lime on this field. Immediately. And here's why. Because your calcium base saturation is too low. Your magnesium is way too low for that low of a CEC soil. That alone is going to help to structure your soil better. Magnesium allows the soil colloid to be much tighter. So on the flip side of that, like on my farm in southeastern Ohio in the foothills of Appalachia, you can have very heavy soils with high magnesium content, which can sometimes drive up your pH. So in those type of situations, if your pH is already past, say, 7, so you don't want to put lime down, this is where it gets a little bit tricky. Well, how are you going to drive your magnesium out of your soil profile? Some guys will use sulfur, elemental sulfur, which will either drive calcium or magnesium out, depending on which one's higher or more dominant on the soil colloid. You do need to make sure that you have good drainage. Another one is gypsum. Gypsum's high in calcium, right? And it won't impact your pH, or in most situations, it will not impact your pH, but it'll force magnesium off of your soil colloid. Well, calcium is much larger, right? So think of it as like taking up pore space in the soil. So if you want your soil tighter because it's sandy, you want more magnesium in there because it's going to pull everything tight. But if you want your soil's already tight because there's too much magnesium, you want more calcium in there. And that's going to give you more porosity. So right there is something that I feel like often gets overlooked and just people, well, plants fix everything. I believe it. Biology is amazing. But I think we can help these things out. We don't, I hope I live for 150 years, but the odds are not likely, So we have a short period of time to quote unquote fix these soils and optimize our plantings. So to me, it's like, if you don't want to use fertilizer, that's okay. I'm not against fertilizer. I think in some cases, in some super degraded soils, personally, I think a foliar application, especially with some of the stuff out there now with humic acid base, you get plants growing, and at 2 weeks, you just give them you give them a dosing of a foliar application and maybe some micronutrients in there and stuff. I think that's really a cool idea, especially for guys doing wildlife plots, because you're not trying to grow world record corn yields here. You can foliar feed these crops just enough. Some of them are going to decompose. It's going to go back into the soil for the next crop. Like, you know what I mean? So, I think in really degraded soils, that's a really awesome idea. But I think that's one of the things is to, like, I used to be in a Facebook group, regenerative agriculture. I think it was regenerative agriculture. It was like a huge group, people all over the world. And I actually was really active and had a lot of nice comments and stuff on there. But where I drew the line is I remember mentioning liming a field. And people like jumped down my throat. Like, you should never, like zero amendments should ever be done. And that's when I said, I just can't be in this group anymore because this is ridiculous. Like, we have to be able to neutralize our pH, right, in this situation. And we degraded the soil. So I think we kind of have to fix it, and right. Just to wait for plants to do that. Can take a while. Same discussion we could have, Ty, on herbicide. Roller crimpers are awesome, but I don't know if you've ever been to Southeastern Ohio, but the terrain is extremely rugged. I mean, you're not going out and just rolling down the road, some flat field. I mean, your terrain is up and down and sideways and this and that. So to get a roller crimper to have constant down pressure and to do, 11, 12, 13, 15, 20 acres, whatever you're planting, and get perfect termination is not great. Like, you're almost better off in a lot of cases using a flail. If you don't want to use herbicide at all, using a flail mower, or some guys don't say, well, a bush hog windrows everything, but I've had great success with bush hog, and I haven't had the major windrow. Now, do I have a perfect thatch? No, but it's been good enough. Then, I mean, the plants have grown extremely well out of my mixes. On our website, those are all off my farm. Haven't had an ounce of fertilizer in 6 years, and we're just using nutrient cycling to, get through those. And I've either bush hogged those or sprayed down with herbicide. Again, I think they're all are tools in our toolbox that can be used, and that's one of the things I wanted to bring to this market was like accessibility. And be able to sit down and talk to, like, you called me and, we talked on the phone for a half hour. Well, if you're talking to me, it was probably longer, but we talked for a while, and I just don't see that happening with a lot of other people. And I can just base it off of the amount of questions I see on social media platforms about, hey, how does this work? And there just isn't a lot of people out there to sit down and talk and go, hey, let's work through your specific example, and take it from there. So that's kind of what we're trying to bring to the market. So
we kind of covered a little bit about the implementation. So you said that with the Nitro Boost, that's the spring one, and that's going to be what I haven't seen what's in now that one, but is it mostly like the legumes in it?
Correct. So it's heavy in legumes. So you have two different types of soybeans. You actually have a high quality forage soybean, which is an Eagle soybean, if you're familiar with Eagle
right.
At all. And then we have an ag bean in there as well. We do have a spring grain in order to try to capture some of the nitrogen that would be naturally decomposing from organic matter. So OM mineralization produces nitrogen. You can look up NRCS or anything like that will have, between 10 and 30 pounds. Sometimes it varies by state of every percent of organic matter is going to equate to 10 to 30 pounds. Let's just use for talking purposes of nitrogen release per year. 33% organic matter, you could have up to 90 pounds of nitrogen release per year. But if you have a monoculture of legumes in there, and the nitrogen is getting broken down and released, there's really no reason for those legumes to suck up that nitrogen, right? They do use some, they do assimilate some, but they're also fixing their own, and they don't necessarily need an exorbitant amount of nitrogen. Very, very minimal. Most soil tests will just say none. When planting legumes for nitrogen fertilization recommendations.
Right.
So that's why I just kind of go on a tangent, but that's why we have some barley in there. That's why we have sunflowers. I call it keeping the nutrients in the cycle. We want to capture things before they leach out. Nitrogen goes through the cycle, becomes nitrate at some point in its lifetime, which is inorganic nitrogen, but it's actually naturally occurring. I just wrote a blog post on that this morning and posted it up because I think that confuses people a lot. They think nitrate is just this like chemically manufactured substance, but like nitrate is naturally occurring in our system. It's just inorganic nitrogen. Now we can apply inorganic nitrogens in nitrate form that are man-made, but nitrate is naturally occurring in the nitrogen cycle. Okay.
Yep.
And it was been doing it long before the Haber-Bosch method was made to mass produce nitrogen fertilizers. But what is interesting about this is, so in our system, we have the sunflowers, we have the barley, we have this year we had rape as a brassica. We try to do every plant type of plant species, and then we have sun hemp, hairy vetch, basically all your annual clovers. You got your crimson clover, your fixation balanza, which is an awesome N fixer. In monocultures, it can produce up to like 220 pounds of N. It's been shown to produce per acre, which is crazy. Absolutely. It's
that's
craziness. I'm trying to, sorghum. Sorry. Sorghum. That's another. So that's obviously not a legume, but we're looking to capture some of that and also add a little bit of above ground biomass.
Yep.
Some people have asked, like, what about corn? And you could definitely do corn. The neat thing about sorghum is, at least in some of the studies I've seen, that it has about 5 times the root mass of corn, which is really cool for aerating your soil. And also think of the root exudation that's happening. Sorghum is just a photosynthetic capturing engine. I mean, you probably have seen some of the pictures, like some of the leaves are on my farm. I just posted, I think that was last week. Some of the leaves are 18 inches long and, 3-4 inches wide. I mean, just capturing so much sunlight. I'm trying to think if there's anything else. There's like 13 things in that mix. I should have had it in front of me, but that's probably the gist. And I'm likely going to tweak it slightly next year. I want to add just a little bit more diversity, change up a couple things. I was really impressed with the rape this year in it. I wasn't sure. I've planted rape in the mix before, but I wasn't sure if there was a better option versus, rape versus maybe, I don't know. I just wasn't sure if there was a different brassica that maybe I should be doing. I've seen some discussions on radish, but then all of the studies I found on radish in springtime is like it puts most of its energy into seed production and doesn't really create much of a tuber. But what blew me away is the browse between myself, my good best buddy who's our distributor in Southeastern Ohio on his farm, and then a couple of customers. The browse the rape has taken, and it's taking it really well. Like it's really been super browse tolerant. Like it'll get browsed, but then it keeps growing. So now I'm like, well, I'm really happy that it's performing as well as it has performed. And I'm sure that it's captured quite a bit of nitrogen, for us. It's going to be terminated and released for that fall crop.
Right. So in regards to the Nitro Boost, I mean, I know timing dates is going to be different across the country, but how much time are you should we kind of be looking at in between from when you plant the Nitro Boost to when you start to look at planting your carbon load? Is there a particular maturity time frame that you kind of want to stay within, or?
I think for everybody's situation is different, right? So if you want to get the most out of the Nitro Boost, obviously the longer you can let it grow, the better. I planted mine this year in May 13th, and I will be planting my fall mix August 13th, roughly.
Okay.
Give or take a day. If you can give it that, most of the species in Nitro Boost are at full, everything's at full maturity at 90 days. There's nothing in there that's, maybe sunflowers might have like a window, like they might be like 70 to 100. Like, they might give you a window on sunflowers. Again, if we were worried about harvesting sunflower, I'd be more concerned with that. But from a root structure perspective and taproot setting down, you get 60 days. I mean, you're doing good things for the soil. Gotcha. And from a wildlife perspective. So I would say minimum, I'd like people to try to aim for 60 days to at least get nitrogen fixation to occur, the root structure to occur. But I mean, we did a couple studies this year where guys were planting in what I would say is colder temperatures than I would have thought would have been adequate from a soil, the outside temperatures are fine, but the soil temperatures were still relatively cold. But kind of looking at, that 10 to 14 day forecast and saying, okay, soil temps are 54 degrees, 70, 80, 82, they're looking at the port and they're going, I'm going to drill that in because the temps are going to be up. That seed might sit for a few days, but it's going to slowly start to germinate. And by the time that soil temp gets to 60, that seed's already got some energy going towards it. I haven't seen enough on that yet that I feel confident in making that recommendation, but we have got some really cool studies on that. So for me, I'm really happy. I mean, my fields look amazing this year. We've had good rains. I think the timing's been perfect. I think August 13th is going to be ideal for getting my fields established. But if you get them in a little bit later, say you're northern Michigan or something, so you're not going to be able to get them in at first or second week of May, but you're likely going to probably want to plant your fall mix then maybe later in August or even Labor Day. After Labor Day, I think it starts to get a little bit hairy right. Because you could get an early frost. You also could have it be 75 degrees in mid-October. So it's kind of hard to say. But I'd like to say by Labor Day, I'd like to see most of the country have it planted, at least upper Midwest. I mean, you get guys in the Southeast, they can probably plant in like November.
Right.
Alabama, it's like that. They can wait quite a bit.
Yeah. Yeah. And then in regards to the different planting styles, I mean, I know you guys basically have instructions on if you're going to like drill it in or if you're doing broadcasting, and your seed rates actually aren't that much different between the two. I think it's only like I think you go up to 20% difference if you're broadcasting, so a little bit extra. Is there one that really seems to stand out more than the other, whether you drill it or broadcast it, or is it pretty solid either way?
Well, I mean, I've for the last 6 years have done all broadcast. Gotcha. So everything you see on our website, all those pictures are only broadcast method, either with a PTO spreader on the tractor or one year I got the tractor stuck. I did this huge, fairly large, like 3.5 acre field. I did with a bag spreader uphill. I might about kill myself, but it was horrible. It was horrible. The tractor got stuck. I had to shovel the seed out of the spreader. It was a nightmare. But anyhow, so both work really well. I mean, obviously drilling is almost ideal. I mean, right. I mean, you're literally cutting the dirt, dropping the seed in the dirt or in the soil, I guess should call it, and then packing it. I mean, it's just ideal. One thing I tell people though is when you broadcast, and I have witnessed this enough that I feel very confident in saying is, don't lose hope after 2 weeks of like, oh, nothing's here. It is a little bit slower process than when you drill it, or if you're used to traditional, like say tillage and then packing it and then coming back and just seeing this green carpet. When you no-till or, spray with herbicide or seed and mow, depending on the plant species within that soil or within that field that you're trying to plant, it just seems to take a little bit long, but it does catch up. I promise that broadcast method always does seem to catch up. And then as far as the rates, I'm one of these guys, I always think less is more when it comes to wildlife plantings. And the last thing you want to do, at least with our mixes, like if it was just a grain, I mean, we could talk nutrient tie-up and stuff, but I won't go down that rabbit hole. But you're not going to see, at least I've never seen where you can put too much grains down that it's literally choking out the other grains. But when you have 4 or 5, different type of brassica species in a mix. And I mean, high quality radish, turnips, forage type brassicas that are meant to be browsed. We're using the cattle industry. Those are awesome. I mean, those are really great mixes. The last thing you want to do is get crazy with seed. And yes, I could sell more seed if I recommended 2x the rate, right? Yes, I understand that. People are like, don't you think you should do more? But I want people to be successful. And I don't think that what I want to do is have people go, oh my gosh, all my brassicas got choked out because I seeded too heavily.
Right.
So I always tell people, increase it. Let's say you have an acre and you increase by 10% or 20%. So you bought 2 acres of seed. Save that last little bit of seed. And then if you go back in 2 weeks or 3 weeks and there's a couple bare spots here and there, just take your hand. I mean, you know what I'm saying? And just toss out a little bit of seed. And if you don't have bare spots, which good Lord willing, you got good rains and you don't, just save the seed. Keep it in a cool, dry place. And next year, use that as your insurance policy. You have a little bit extra to put down on those different areas, or maybe you have a new spot you want to try, you get a new permission spot, whatever it might be. That's my recommendation on those seeding rates.
Yeah. Yeah, no, that was, again, one of the biggest things that I was most hesitant about coming over to my own blend is just trying to figure out how much of each type of seed that where you're not overseeding and stunting everything because you've, tried to pack too much seed in. So yeah, that's certainly something that when I was doing it myself, I was like, I spent weeks looking over the numbers of how much of each seed type, how many pounds of each. Yeah, it wrecked me.
Oh yeah, it's an exorbitant amount of work, and especially if you're trying to do 2 acres or 3 acres or 4, it's like, oh my gosh, it's just so much work to try to one, get all those seeds that you want, and then try to mix them in the right ratios. And by the time you do all of it, honestly, I that's why I feel very good about our, you buy from one of our distributors an acre's $99. I mean, I think that's a really good price to market for the amount of diversity that's in there. Yeah. And I'm very proud to bring a seed blend to market that we don't try to say, Albert's Big Buster Turnip on there, or, which we can do, variety not stated, and then I can name it, Ties Clover or whatever. And that's fine. But I think that a lot of people, appreciate just the transparency of like, hey, this is an 8-pin forage turnip. That's awesome. This is a Winfred brassica. Like, they know what they're buying, right? They understand the quality. Hey, that's an Eagle forage soybean that's in your spring mix. That's everybody knows that name. So those are some of the things that I think that we do that are a little bit different and help to, again, be overly transparent with our customer. One of the things you mentioned about with the seeding, and seeding rates and things is, I will say on drilling, we recommend 45 pounds to the acre. And that's what most of our guys who have drills have been running. I will say that I think next year, I might put a range of like 45 to like maybe 55, just because we did have a couple people say, hey, I'd like it. I love the mix. It's doing great, but I just want it like a little bit more dense. So what I'm finding is, it's kind of funny, because what I'm finding is that you can make the recommendations and then people have their own idea of exactly what they want to see. So I think what I want to do next year is run some calculations to make sure that it's still in a safe, from a density planting perspective, it's still like safe without choking out everything. So I want to run some numbers on that, but then I think I'm just going to give a range like, hey, between 45 is what I'm going to do, because I don't really want to spend extra money on extra seed. But if you want to go up to a little bit more, go up to 50, but don't go more than that, right? For talking purposes. So we'll see, but that's kind of what I'm thinking. That's what we've done on the broadcast, right? We've given that range of like, what's your thatch look like, et cetera, and then make that decision on your own. And I think people are pretty happy with that. Yeah. No, I'm going to be doing 50 pounds per acre. Because I'm on my broadcast, I'm like, I'll just do an even 50, see how it looks, and then can always adjust next year. Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, I think with a little bit of rain, hopefully you get it'll be jumping out of the ground. I'm sure of that. Yeah, and I'm pretty happy with, at least with the cover crop I put in so far. I mean, I did get a lot more grass this year, probably because I tilled last year, brought up some of that seed a little bit. But even the grass areas, like you
pull the stems away from that seed, and there's bare dirt underneath those stems. So I'm excited to see that when I broadcast in, it's going to drop right down to that soil, lay all that green stuff down on top of it. It's going to be good.
Oh, absolutely.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, it's amazing that sometimes I think people get really frustrated with weeds, especially in the springtime and whatnot, but I have planted fields that were like old pipeline easements. One I'm working on this year was just an old overgrown thicket for like the last 30 years. We just like bush hog like 3 acres out of it. And, of course, there's a ton of weeds and grass and everything after you cut everything off of it. But when you pull a soil sample, you're like, well, this soil's not that bad, So yeah, I'm going to use herbicide that for this first year to get things rocking and stuff. My point is it's like just because grass there doesn't mean that the soil's bad. We just have to adjust and maybe burn it down with herbicide and get a good fall crop going. That's going to help suppress those weeds into next year.
Yep.
So I always tell people all is not lost. We're still having photosynthesis occurring. And if that's happening, good things are happening.
So the other thing, I've talked quite a bit about how I spread my seed out and I go through and terminate with a herbicide and basically like a cultipacker or a roller or something like that just to lay it down. But then you had mentioned that flail mower, and I looked into it a little bit. It looks pretty intriguing. So I was wondering, how would you just basically do the same thing? You would broadcast and then mow over top of that? Or do you mow it and then try spreading the seed down after you've mowed?
I would rather mow over the top personally. That's what I've done with the bush hog. I have not used a flail mower yet. Okay. I have some friends who have them. But what intrigued me about the flail mower is the NRC. I don't know if I sent it to you, but if you Google, is it USDA, maybe it is, and they did flail mower studies on this. And they did crimpers, flail mowers, and there was one other one, and I apologize, I don't remember, but I think maybe it was like a sickle bar mower or something like that. And what was really interesting is it was a 3-way cover crop. It was hairy vetch, crimson clover, and like medium red clover. So not super easy. Well, crimson and hairy vetch are fairly easy to terminate. Crimson, especially like with a crimper, I mean, crimson is toast, but as long as it's at the fairly decent time of year to do it. But the vetch and stuff, I follow, like I mentioned, a lot of these farming groups, and guys will get really irritated. They're trying to figure out, how do I not tangle up my planter, et cetera. So anyhow, long way of saying this, USDA study did it, and the highest rate of termination, I want to say it was like in the 90 percentile, was flail mowing. Now, with everything, there comes negatives. I don't know a ton about flail mowing, but some of the things that I've heard is like the speed at which you have to drive is relatively slow. Like you're not cutting across that field like when you have a bush hog on the back. You have to drive relatively slow. So it's just like a crimper. Like crimpers are awesome, but there's some negatives, right? Uneven ground. I have to go a little bit slower. It's not like just like herbicide. You got a big boom. You can cover a lot of ground really fast, but you're using herbicide, which in and of itself is something that bothers some people. So I always try to say to people, every single option is going to have some pros, some cons. But yeah, I'm intrigued as well by the flail mower option. I've actually been trying to look for some used ones, or there's some brands out there that seem to be fairly affordable, especially compared to some of the costs of other things that are out on the market right now. I'm not familiar with the brands, and I don't want to buy something and be like, this thing's a piece of junk.
Right. Yeah.
So if you find anything, Ty, please shoot me an email, because I'm definitely interested to kind of know what people recommend out there as far as flail mowers go. But the studies are definitely intriguing.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah. Cause that was the one thing, I watched a few videos on how they operate, and they're pretty interesting pieces of equipment for sure. And I was just like, well, I've never done, a seed in the mow to terminate before. So I was like, I wonder how that really works out. So, but yeah, because again, one of those things, like herbicide works great, but if you're trying to get away from it, you got to look at some of those other options. And
absolutely. And that's something, like I have fields this year that will have herbicide used on 100%. But I have other fields that look the fall mix did such a good job of suppressing weeds for my spring planting that I don't think I'm going to use herbicide this fall, like at all. and not on every field, but on some fields that look really good, there's enough biomass there that I plan on seeding and mowing off, sorghum and everything like that, and just laying it down. So I do think that as a system progresses, again, not everybody can go out and buy a tractor and buy a crimper and buy a no-till drill. And that's something when I say, we at Vitalize Seed want to be accessible to people, is like, I want to have the conversations that we're having right now with the guy who's like, hey, here's what I have. Like, this is all I got. I got a disc, and it's like, okay, you feel you need a disc? Yes, I do. Okay, well, can we change the angles on the disc? Can it not tear up the soil as much? Can we put them straighter? Like, there's little things that we can do that any step, in my opinion, towards soil conservation is a step in the right direction.
Totally agree. Yeah, so that's the other thing is like, yeah, I mean, there's certainly no right or wrong way to do it, especially in regards to where you're at, what your terrain looks like you said. Plenty of ways to skin a cat for sure.
Absolutely. I mean, there's a guy out of Wisconsin. Have you ever seen Wagner Implements?
No, I haven't.
I think his name's Marcus. Super nice guy. I've messaged him before. He makes a bunch of these small, like 2 and 3 row planters. I mean, this guy, he is super talented. I mean, his work is just beautiful. Check him out on social media, Wagner Implements. I mean, he takes like old 7,000, John Deere or 7,100, whatever the planters are, cuts them down and redoes all their work, puts row cleaners on there, seed bed firmers. I mean, they look like something out of a magazine. And then he can weld really good, and he's made like some vertical tillage equipment, and that's something that's fairly big in the ag space as well, that you're not necessarily digging into the soil, but it's more of a residue management technique, now. So you're basically chopping up, let's say, corn stalks. So you're just running it across the top. Now, the downside of that for food plotters in a lot of cases is, one, again, terrain. 2 is you do have to drive from the minimal that I know about vertical tillage is it does take quite a bit of speed in order to actually have an impact on the residue, which in a lot of guys' food plots, they're just simply in a small little field. It's not like a big square field where they can just open it up and let the tractor run.
Sure.
But again, just another neat thing that has been used in the ag space for a long time. You look up Great Plains vertical tillage, and they'll show videos out in Kansas where these farmers are running wide open across the field, and like the soil doesn't even look disturbed, but they're just chopping up all of the residue. It's really cool. And he actually has made, I don't know if he's selling them yet or if they're still prototypes, but he's made some for like food plot size. So again, just another neat little thing that I wouldn't look down. If somebody's like, I like tillage or I like that, I think we have to be cognizant of some of the negative impacts we can have on our fungal systems, erosion, et cetera. But at the same time, hey, you want to use cover crops twice a year, you want to reduce fertilizer, you want to reduce herbicide, I think there's something to be said about just trying to make everything more inclusive and more based on like truly peer-reviewed research that's out there that we can all rely and teach each other on, and not just like, the old, hey, I always done it this way, or, hey, I heard this at the local watering hole, this is what you're supposed to do. And I think that's just been what's happened in food plotting for so long.
Yep.
You plant brassicas, what are you supposed to do? Hammer them with nitrogen, and I used to do that because that's the information that was out there.
Yep.
And it's like today, I just think we can do so much with the resources that we have to help educate each other. And I love doing it. I love talking with guys. I learn more every day. And, I'm really thankful for guys like you and all of our customers that have given us a chance or emailed. And even if they haven't bought yet, I mean, if they've just emailed and let me talk to them about their soil samples or whatever, I mean, I love it. Yeah. I absolutely love it. And I appreciate every one of you.
Well, thanks, man. No, again, you guys came out with a great product. I mean, especially because, what I had envisioned, what I was trying to create, you guys did it and did it better. So, I mean, I was so thankful when I looked at what you guys did. I'm like, oh, my job just got so much easier because I don't have to bust my brain anymore to try to figure this out. These guys did it for me. And speaking of which, so we really didn't even talk about the carbon load blend, and basically that's getting everything together for basically food plot season and your fall blend of Beal Hunovers. So We did break down a little bit. You got your cereal grains, you've got your clovers, you got multiple different types of clovers in there, the different types of brassicas. And again, like you said, it's going to be a breakdown of adding that carbon that can get broke down then from the Nitro Boost in the spring then. Did I sum that up pretty right? Okay.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, so when you look at mixes, every plant is made up of parts carbon and parts nitrogen. And the lower a carbon and nitrogen ratio, the faster a plant is going to break down. So, for example, hairy vetch is about 11-to-1 carbon and nitrogen. If I had a monoculture of hairy vetch that was planted in the fall, and I came in the spring and that hairy vetch was still growing, and I terminated it with glyphosate, you would expect to come back in a couple of weeks and see very minimal hairy vetch left, just like clover. If you ever have sprayed a clover plot off and you come back, you're like, man, it's just bare dirt. There is no thatch. But I think this paints a really good visual, right, to understand carbon and nitrogen ratios. If you had a monoculture of rye grain and you sprayed it off at the same time period to the field, say a field of hairy vetch on one side, a field of rye grain on the next, and you sprayed it off and you came back 2 weeks later and you looked at that hairy vetch field, it looks like nothing's there. You looked at that rye grain field, what would you expect to see? You'd expect to see straw. It looked like somebody just cut straw up and put it out to plant their yard or something like that. And the reason that is because the higher carbon to nitrogen ratio of the rye grain. So with our mixes, what we focus it on is if you can maximize your understanding of carbon to nitrogen ratios, you can maximize your nutrient cycling. So in the spring, as that rye grain's breaking down, because our Nitro Boost, as we call it, our spring summer mix, is giving the soil the things to cycle the nutrients out of that rye grain, winter wheat, triticale, etc. It is pulling those nutrients out, feeding your nitro, right? Feeding your microbes, and getting your soil prepped up, because now your Nitro Boost is taking all of that, using it, assimilating it, growing, capturing the nitrate that is going to get through the system with your sunflowers and things like that. Now it's getting terminated and your carbon load is going back in, and that carbon load is going to suck all those nutrients out. So the key, though, is that make sure that you don't have too much carbon or vice versa. If you have too much carbon in a system and your microbes don't have enough nitrogen, you'll have what's called nitrogen or nutrient tie-up. You simply will have your nutrients where, similar to the situation you described with your own field. Well, the scary part about this is the inverse. So if you have too much nitrogen, and this can be supplemented through nitrogen fertilization, but even just monocultures of legumes without cover crops, right? Or without fall cover crops, I should say. If you have too much nitrogen in a system, your microbes are going to be populated rapidly, right? They're getting fed. But what ends up happening, Ty, is they're sitting here going, hey, man, we need carbon. We got to balance this out, right? They're always working towards equilibrium. We got to balance our system out. Hey, I need some parts carbon here. Well, where are they going to go if there's no carbon left? They're going to go to your organic matter. You can literally mine your own organic matter if you don't have your system balanced. So that's why with our system, we've really put a big focus in trying to explain carbon and nitrogen ratios. I don't think it's talked about enough. I don't think that it's explained enough. And that's, again, why I go back to, we're really a nutrient cycling company because we want to make sure that we're cycling, the building the soil aspect, organic matter increases, conversely, CEC increasing over time as organic matter because they're very directly correlated. That's all awesome. But that's a byproduct of good soil health practices and cycling nutrients from spring to fall and fall to spring. Oh, and of course, we want it to be hyper attractive to white-tailed deer. So, we do things like put in forage turnips instead of just purple top. We want to have a couple different varieties of forage turnip. Wind-fred brassica, which is a hybrid between a rape and a kale, and it can actually grow. It doesn't grow much of a bulb, if at all. Sometimes it'll have a little small bulb. So we're not really doing that one from a huge below ground, subsoil aeration perspective. But the nice thing about brassicas, or that particular brassica, is it can grow 3-foot top. So a ton of above ground biomass, which is obviously we still want to feed our whitetail. Yep. So we try to do a lot of those things as well. And then the last thing I'll mention on that fall mix is people sometimes ask, well, should you mix your brassicas and your grains and whatnot?
Yeah.
Interestingly enough, brassicas are non-mycorrhizal. Mycorrhizal is a fungal network within the soil that helps to communicate all things from plants to the subsoil as your subsoil microbes. As your systems progress, they typically go from a bacterial dominated to a fungal dominated system, which allows them to break down higher lignin filled crops faster. Lignin would be like that rye straw after growing season, right? It's tougher, it's more full of lignin. Fungal networks are needed in order to break down those type of trees, those type of plants. Similarly, like you would see in a forest, when a tree falls and it's decaying, what do you normally see on them is mushrooms. So fungal dominated systems are breaking down that higher lignin filled crop. The reason I say that is because although brassicas are non-mycorrhizal, I think this is really cool and shows how little we actually know about biosignaling that happens between plants and root systems in all of the microsystems. But what we do know is when brassicas are planted alongside plants that are mycorrhizal, so they communicate very well with the mycorrhizal system through root exudation, they can actually then tap into and take advantage of the mycorrhizal system. So if they're just planted in monoculture, they have no communication with mycorrhizal, there's no reason for fungal networks to even be associated with them. But when planted in complementary species, they actually are able to take advantage of that. So what does that mean? Better drought resistance, better pest resistance, higher nutrient density because they're able to take up nutrients more efficiently, et cetera. So I won't go down the whole rabbit hole of that, but there definitely is a lot of interesting science behind that, and why people like Dr. Christine Jones and Dr. James White in his rhizophagy cycle discussions talk about some of the importance of how those microbes cycle. And in Dr. Christine Jones' speech is talking about complementary plant species, whether they're non-mycorrhizal or not, but why they're actually important, because when they work together, they all get the benefits of that subsoil microbiome.
Yep. Yeah. And like I ran into that last year because that was the first year I really put everything all together, my brassicas, cereal rye, everything like that. And yeah, I didn't notice any indication that mixing everything together was a detriment. In fact, it was probably the best food plot I'd had since I started food plotting. So
that's awesome.
It was kind of like one of those things like, well, whatever the caution of not mixing this together, I didn't see it. So I think I'm good. That's
awesome. That's good for you. Yeah. I mean, sometimes you just got to try it, and yep. I mean, with our mixes, it's pretty tried and true. I shot a 5.5-year-old buck off one of my fields November 3rd. My cousin killed a 5.5-year-old big, heavy 8-point off one of our fields 2 years before that, just shooting piles of doe over these fields. I mean, there's no,
yep.
And you see in the pictures, I mean, we have turnips and brassicas as big as my ball cap, so it definitely works. You're not choking it out. The biggest thing is you do have to have the right balance. I mean, you can't put 12 pounds of turnips down and 300 pounds of rye and go, wait a second, this didn't work. Well, no, that isn't going to. So having that balance is really important. And I think that's what we bring to the market and the food plot industry.
Yeah. All right, man. Well, again, my battery's getting low, so I'm starting to get nervous that we're going to get cut off here. So, but before I let you go, you talked about that you've got dealers, throughout the country there. And I saw too that you guys on your website is doing also free shipping on the carbon load. So that, especially if someone wants to try it and they don't have a dealer near them, that is a huge deal. I mean, that's why I turned away from ordering seed from companies that weren't local a few years ago. It's because of shipping. If you want to give it a try, now's the time to do it. If you want to try the seed blend out, because saving on the shipping is, about half the cost you end up, especially if you have a larger food plot you're trying to do. So certainly.
Yeah, absolutely. Thanks, Ty. And we can also do bulk orders, and we've done bulk orders for guys who they don't have a dealer neither, and they're like, hey, I need 15 acres or something. We've done bulk orders on that. Just contact us separately. But yeah, free shipping on all orders. We do have on our website, find a distributor. I think there's 13 of them now, a couple in Michigan, Ohio, et cetera, and we're adding more. Thank you so much, Ty. This has been a lot of fun. I know I talk a lot, but hopefully my passion comes through.
I mean, I'm not sure if you caught the fact that I was, as you're talking, I'm like writing notes, like, okay, can I look into that later? Can I look into that later? Yeah. No, man, you are a wealth of knowledge. And like I said, I'm excited to see, what this turns into this year, especially with, getting away from the fertilizer for the first year, see how it does. I'm curious to see if I do have any deficiencies that's going to pop up, where I might see some of the plants struggle a little bit. But I think overall, especially because you covered with me going through my soil sample, and there's room for improvement, but it's not too bad. So I think we'll be all right for this year. And then you said that with your blogs and whatnot, where if someone was looking to look up some of those writings and whatnot, where could they find that as well?
Yeah, so I think I have it called Soil Health Friday on the Michigan Sportsman's Forum. So obviously that's a pretty popular forum. And then I also post them on Facebook under Habitat Chat, which is it's called Habitat Chat by Habitat Podcast. Or you can just follow our Facebook page at Vitalize Seed, and we post them there as well. Same with our Instagram, Vitalize Seed, and we'll post links to those there as well.
Perfect. Yep. And then certainly, man, I'll make sure to have links everything that you just covered there in the show notes. So if anyone wants to quick find you, they can certainly do that as well, man. But yeah, I appreciate you taking the time and going over all this. So yeah, man.
Anytime, buddy.
Is there anything else before I let you go that you think that needs to be covered or highlighted?
Just enjoy it. We're having fun, right? We're having fun. Enjoy it. Be safe. Don't stress yourself out. Food plotting and planting things for wildlife, or, even your garden or whatnot. You got to enjoy it. So enjoy it and reach out anytime. I try to be super accessible. Email, email and text is typically the best. Sometimes people call me and it's like, I got a 1-year-old son, so I'm chasing him around, but email and text work out the best, or Facebook Messenger. And, I appreciate you. I appreciate all our customers, our distributors, et cetera. It's really fun to get this opportunity. And thank you so much for having me on.
All right. That is a wrap on the conversation with Albert. I probably should have warned everyone to make sure you had a pen and notepad ready. Having listened back through the conversation, I should have gave you fair warning that you're going to want to take some notes. Albert threw out a ton of information out there, and I should have thought of it, because even going through both times, originally talking to him and then also listening again and doing my edits, I wrote down basically a half a page of additional notes on what he explained, other topics to look into more, and different implements to utilize, and basically just stuff that he covered that I want to learn more about. Again, sorry for not giving you fair warning. You may have to listen through it again, take some of those notes down, or just start following some of those links that he explained that's going to be also down in the show notes to learn more about Vitalize Seed and the approach that Albert takes to improving soil health and creating better food. So that's going to be it for this episode. So again, as always, get out there, be safe, and have fun.